Good morning, friends. I feel like the worship service should continue. Maybe I can let it with what I have to say, because I want to talk to you this morning about Gethsemanes. Now, many of you know what a Gethsemane is, but you know that Jesus went to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is across the Kinyon Valley to the east side of Jerusalem. It's between Jerusalem and Bethany, where Jesus went, where he stayed just before the Palm Sunday entry. And in that garden, there is a Gethsemane. Can we show a picture of the Gethsemane? If it were working, we could see it. Okay.
I can see it on my screen.
You can see it on yours? It looks a lot like that. Boy, I really wanted that to work too. It is a giant stone tub that has been chiseled out. That's a nice picture of the Garden of Gethsemane there in the Kinyon Valley. But a Gethsemane is not a garden. A Gethsemane is a wine press. Semene means oil, like sesame seeds. You see the similarity in spelling? And get, or geth if you prefer, one being Arabic and one Israeli, is a pressure, a force. So it is the pressing together of the olives, of the oil to make olive oil. There were, as you can see in that picture, there are olive trees. And they lay this netting down underneath the olive trees, and they shake the limbs. And the ripe olives fall down into that netting. If you want to describe that netting, think of the what is it called, a North Sea fisherman or tuna wars or things you see on TV where they bring up a big haul of fish. And as they bring it over the boat, you see all the water dripping out, and then they just release the fish. Well, all that water dripping out is the olive oil, and inside are the pits of the olives, that everything that's not been squeezed out, that's the olive. And it's all drained in such a way with gravity flowing that it goes off of a trough into a jar or a tub or whatever you use to catch the drainage, to catch the olive oil. It is an olive press that creates olive oil. That's a Gethsemane. By golly, I wish I had that picture. If we talk about the Garden of Gethsemane, do not think of it as a garden of flowers or a garden of vegetation, all green and lovely and tra-la-la-la-la. Think of it as a place of pressure, a place where something is squeezed out of you. It is that kind of a position we're talking about here. Jesus went into that Garden of Gethsemane after he had what we considered to be the Last Supper, the Seder meal that we all had together a few weeks ago. Then afterward, he washed the disciples' feet, and he went out into the garden. And there was this Gethsemane there in the garden. It was a gathering place for all the olive trees to come around, and they were to get their olive oil. And he said, now I want you to wait here and pray, because tonight's going to be an important night. You need to be close to Yahweh God. Pray. And I go on a little bit further, and Peter, James, and John tagged along, and he said, no, you wait here and pray. I need to be alone. But John Mark, Mark's Gospel, John Mark, whose home the Last Supper was held in, was trailing behind the disciples. He was spying on them, as it were. He did not want to be left alone. He is the eyewitness to the account that says that when Jesus was alone praying in the garden, he exerted like great drops of blood. His sweat was pooling up so much by the burden that he was experiencing that literally he was sweating through his clothes. And he prayed, "O Lord, I really don't want to have to do this. Let this cup of bitterness, this pain be taken away from me. But not what I want, but what you want. Let's do that, shall we? That was a hard thing for him to say. I think if we were to look at it today, we would say that our world is crowded with Gethsemanes. There are far too many Gethsemanes, places where we are pressed, where our juices are squeezed out of us, as it were, and we are in the midst of very difficult prayer. Tornado hits Gaylord, Michigan. I've been through Gaylord many times. I've met the people who live in Gaylord. I wonder if any of those whom I've met have lost their homes, or a relative who has lost their life. 2 planes crash into the World Trade Center. Over 2,000 people killed like that. For many, it becomes nothing more than just a news item. But there are people whose lives are affected, people whose places have become Gethsemanes, where the very juices of what gives them meaning and purpose squeezed out of them. We hear it all the time. An earthquake here, a flood there, a typhoon here. Thousands of people going through life-changing situations that we just kind of flick off, and it means very little to us. If you've ever had a son or a daughter in the hospital, you've ever had a father or a mother in fighting the very difficult times of their diseases, then you have some idea of what a Gethsemane is like. You know the difficulty that comes as you struggle with what to pray, how frequently to pray. It is a time of great pressure. It's interesting to be in a waiting room or an area around the intensive care unit of a hospital and watch to see what kind of people are there and who they turn to in times of difficulty. Many turn to their phone or to the internet. Some will try to read a book, hoping to find some hope, some wisdom in the words of someone else. When God seems to be absent, when your life seems to be inconsolable, when life is going against you in every possible way, when it seems your very soul has been torn from you, who do you turn to? What do you do? I'd like to offer the thought that very tension is what should make us turn to God. John Donne, for example, was a 17th century poet. He was the assistant to the Lord Chancellor of England when suddenly he was arrested and thrown into prison for political reasons. And he was separated from his wife. He became very, very ill, even unto death, sapped his strength. And all he could do was write. And he wrote some of the greatest Christian literature that is still read today in the depths of great pain. Who do we turn to? If we are wise, we turn to God. If we are wise, as the song says, we speak Jesus in all the conditions of life. So what are we to do? Well, I think what we need to do is to pray. I think it's important for us to pray. My sister, who is a wonderful lady by all accounts, although she would tell you she got all the brains and all the looks. I just think she got all the looks. But my sister, who is not a believer, believes in prayer. And I asked her, I said, why? You've never made a public confession of Jesus. You've never said anything about your belief in theology, yet you say you pray all the time. She says it's a good psychological exercise. She's right. if we hear some of the things that we say to ourselves, actually hear them, they're pretty stupid. If we start praying out loud and hear what we're praying for, I believe most of us would adjust our praying. Because what we're really saying is that we want to work out this relationship between us and the Almighty, between us and our pain, or between us and our relationships, and we need to pray because it is a good, healthy thing for us to do, to get beyond ourselves. I think it's also necessary because prayer becomes that trough through which the oil comes out and goes into the jars that hold the oil. It becomes a venting place where we can express our emotions and our feelings. It becomes a place where we don't want to be, but where we must be. This place of pressure, this place of Gethsemane. Why do you think the disciples fell asleep? Because it's easier to sleep than it is to pray. Nobody wants to be in that situation. So what do? The classic definition for depression, something that I was taught in childhood, where we jump in bed and we cover up our head and we hope nobody finds us. That's depression. That's not prayer. Let me tell you what prayer does. Prayer does two things. Praying in a time of deep depression is that prayer helps us cope with our hardships. It helps us understand them in a new way. Classic story is told about the missionary couple whose daughter became very ill, young baby, on the verge of losing the child in death. And the wise men of the village says, it's like boiling water. You put an egg in boiling water and it becomes hard and brittle. You could put a potato in boiling water and it becomes soft and pliable. And then he, as a wise man, looked at the missionary couple and said, be like the potato. Some of us are placed in boiling water and we come out like an egg. We come out hard and brittle and angry. And we need to become like the potato, where the boiling water, where the pressure of that press coming down upon us softens us and brings out something good out of us. Second thing prayer does, and I think this is an important point, prayer leads us away from temptation. At least it does for me. When I've been in those difficult situations, when I didn't know at one point if our daughter was going to live or die, and she was in the hospital in the intensive care unit, I found myself praying for her immediate healing. I want it, and I want it now. And I got to tell you that I learned something through that prayer. We should not compromise God's plan for our own wants and desires. God was working something out with our daughter and with my wife and with myself. And it was a painful time where we held each other's hands together and dared not let go, for it was all we had to hang on to. We've given up all medical hope. We've given up we discovered that faith is only faith when it's all you've got. And we were holding on to our faith. To be released from that process, to be pulled away from that process would deprive us of what we needed to learn and how God wanted to show His plan to other people, because we wanted to escape the pressure. I think prayer can help lead us away from the temptation to short-circuit the plans of God. I think each one of us, if not now, later on, if not now, previously, all go through a Gethsemane. A time when all the pressure in the world is pushed down upon you, and we see what you're made of by what comes out of you, just like A Gethsemane takes the oil from the olive. We all pass through a Gethsemane. What do you do when you're in that place of pressure? What do you do when all you should do and all you can do is pray? When you are squeezed and crushed? I tell you, my friends, I believe we will find that Gethsemane is a place where either we will kneel or we will not. We will pray or we will shake our fists at the heavens. The time when we wrestle with what God says and what we want. And the one who stayed awake through it all, he was the one who had the wisdom to say, not my will, but thine be done.